If you don't get it right, that's the thing that's going to kill your business.
What does good mean to you?
It's about wanting to give back to their local community. What we're trying to achieve is to enable community venues to thrive. For me, really, it's about just wanting to impact people's lives in a positive way.
How do you think about good for profit? Because obviously you seem to do this quite well.
You need to be able to create a viable, commercially stable business to be able to do good at scale. I put myself out there on LinkedIn quite a lot. I find that very difficult, actually.
What would you say is the toughest thing about it for you?
I mean, the embarrassment. Every single person has a personal brand. That's all about how you present yourself and the impact that you can have.
You mentioned about your mother.
She unfortunately passed away in 2018. You know, in her dying days, we talked about doing good and wanting to have an impact. And that was very motivating for me. She's actually played a big part in it.
That's really, really beautiful. Wow.
It's very powerful.
It really is.
Actually.
Yeah. Welcome, my friend. Really good to have you here. Felix, I've been looking forward to speaking with you. I'm not sure how we bumped into each other or how we got to know each other, but welcome in the podcast regardless.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. Obviously, founder of Sharesy, which we'll talk a lot about today. You've done quite a few other podcasts as well already. So we'll try to kind of touch on things that you may not have touched on some other stuff, if you're okay with that.
That sounds great to me.
Awesome. To kick us off, one question that I like to ask our guests is, obviously the concept behind the podcast is good for profit, kind of businesses that are profitable or revenue driven in some way, but also trying to create good in the world. But if I was to ask you the question, sort of, what does good mean to you, or what does a good for profit business, let's say, mean to you personally?
Well, first of all, it was the thing that really attracted me to this podcast because it's something that I'm very passionate about. I think about good for profit or tech for good is something I talk about quite a lot. I think it's just being mission-led, about wanting to do good. It's as simple as that. And that can, I think, come in many forms, right? But it's about wanting to give back somehow. And what I talk about with the concept of tech for good is that you need to be able to create a viable, commercially stable business to be able to do good at scale. So as with a charity, if you're running a charity, you need to have income to be able to do good and to be able to affect the lives of lots of people. So for me, really, it's about just wanting to impact people's lives in a positive way. And, you know, the whole idea of Sharesy actually came about because I was thinking about trying to start a social enterprise, and that was actually not profitable. So the idea was just to try and help some schools in my local area.
Yeah.
I just left a previous startup. I was wondering what to do next. My wife's a deputy head teacher and she worked in state primary schools. And I was thinking, well, these institutions are desperately in need of money, of income. So what can I do to help? And then the idea built from there that actually you can do good and be profitable. And this is something
was there a revolutionary thought?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's very interesting because early in my journey, I got laughed out of the room when I talked about tech for good. The idea of actually having tech for good and what even is the concept of tech for good and, being a for good business that is actually profitable too.
That wasn't really something that landed very well in the early days with...
I think thought has really evolved on this one.
Yeah.
But
which is great.
The feedback was, well, you're either for profit or you're not. And I really fundamentally disagreed with that. I think you can be, for profit. And if you're a business that takes on investment because you have a grand vision, then your investors are giving you money because they see a return. So they can both believe in the impact of your business, but they also want to see a commercial return as well.
Absolutely.
So actually that's where things really start to evolve.
This episode is brought to you by EcoSwap. EcoSwap is bringing together the UK's favourite eco-friendly high street brands onto a single gift card, allowing you to give the gift of choice, where your loved ones can choose from brands such as The Body Shop, Rituals, Toast Brewing, The National Trust, and many, many more. And our gift to our listeners is 10% off your first purchase with EcoSwap when you use the code GOODFORPROFIT at checkout. What sets EcoSwap apart is their commitment to sustainability and ethics. They meticulously curate their brand selection, ensuring that each one meets rigorous standards set by esteemed certifiers such as B Corp, 1% for the Planet, Climate Neutral, or they're a UK registered charity. With EcoSwap, you're not just giving a gift. You're choosing to support the UK's best brands that are genuinely committed to benefiting both people and planet. So go ahead, give an EcoSwap gift card today. Visit ecoswap.uk and use the code GOODFORPROFIT at checkout. That's good for profit with no spaces for your 10% off your first order today. It's so interesting that, I'm very happy that the thought is changing around all of that. But what fascinated me is that I suppose when I first started thinking about doing this sort of thing, I kind of naively thought, well, this just makes perfect sense. I don't understand why there would be a problem here. But when I started speaking with people, I realized, oh, wait a second, there is a bit of a mismatch in the way that people kind of think of, is it for good or is it for profit? And there seems to be a bit of a gap between the two, which really surprised me because to me, kind of thinking about this, I thought this just makes perfect sense. But I agree with you. I think it is changing, slightly changing sort of over time, and there's more and more money that's being put into businesses that are, let's call them good for profit. No bias here whatsoever with that term. But the other thing that's quite interesting for me is the role that charities perhaps have to play versus the role that businesses have to play. And I wonder whether you have any thoughts around that at all.
It's a very interesting one because we do work quite closely with some charities. One charity is Spread a Smile. It's an amazing charity that works with very unwell children that are in hospital, and they provide entertainment and bring joy to those children. So we've seen, my business has raised money for them through fundraising and so on. We've seen the way that they operate, and it's very challenging. You have to act like a business. You have to think about how you can have a sustainable source of income, and that's effectively a business development effort.
Yep.
It has big operations. You have to think about actually how you're serving all the people that are engaging with you. There are a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
And yet somehow there is a bit of a lack of understanding that you also need to be paying people a good wage. You need to have really high quality people in those teams. And so there are parallels with a startup business, which is also trying to fund itself, particularly for businesses that are pre-profit. So you might raise finance, you are living off that investment in the early days, you're managing a runway. So, lots of similarities actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I definitely see all of those. And I suppose that the raising side is a really good one because you still have to raise on. Well, you don't have to. It depends what you're trying to do, obviously. But if you have to raise for a startup to get the high growth that you're looking for, well, it's still raising at the end of the day. And it's just that for one of them, I suppose you're raising because people feel particularly kind of associated with the problem you're trying to solve, and sort of in the charity's case, and they think my return is the good that I'm creating in the world, whatever that is. Whereas for the other one, it's, yes, they're looking for a profit, but also actually, I would probably argue that the investors that put money into this sort of thing are also interested in actually solving the problem and feel somewhat closely related to it. Yeah,
so Sharesy's investors, we found are really committed to our cause, to our mission, which is fantastic. I'm very passionate about that, and I think that has been one of the reasons why they've come on board with us. But, startup businesses, there are lots of different ways that you can fund a business. Of course, if you can bootstrap your own business so that you can fund that very early development and then get to profitability quickly, then fantastic.
Absolutely.
So I have a huge amount of admiration for those that can do that. Then you've got some right down the other end who might go and take on significant amounts of, institutional funding. And then have a very fast growth trajectory, but they're constantly then chasing that growth.
Yes.
We are, I would say, somewhere in the middle, where we have taken on investment from angel investors, actually, but that's given us a little bit more freedom to think about the pace of our growth. But yeah, absolutely. There are similarities with charities that are then also having to think about that, that runway, and how they then are always thinking about when is the next
funding round, so to speak.
Effectively, So when are they next going to have an opportunity to generate an income, and that becomes a huge part of their everyday.
Wow.
Thinking about that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've worked with a couple of charities before, but not deeply enough to kind of. I've definitely seen the importance of having to constantly fund and making sure that you've got donors that are helping, and in some cases I've seen charities work with some sort of debt financing as well, as an example. So there'll be there are donations that are expected to come in from the next round or whatever, and so they think, okay, well maybe you can raise some debt for now and then pay some of it back with the donations and then carry on. So
it's really interesting, and of course the whole concept around doing good and good for profit. Obviously, there's a very close connection with charities that are not for profit necessarily, but they are for good and trying to have that impact. And that's something that really motivates me. We've actually just had a team session where we were looking at the values of our company.
Amazing.
And while we think about doing good and wanting to have an impact, it actually wasn't one of our stated values. So we've actually just introduced it. So it's become one of our new values, which is just to do good, which sounds like a really obvious one, but it's something that we live every day. And we wanted to be able to call that out and to say, well, actually, this is something that we want to be thinking about. Values should be in everything that you do every day. It should be in the way that you hire and in your ways of working. It should be in the way that you talk to your customers, to your investors. So actually that came out of a team discussion, and it was something I was really proud about, actually.
That's really incredible. And I would love to touch a bit more on that. Maybe later we can go a little bit more into culture and sort of how you've built a culture at Sharesy and how that's gone. But for the sake of our listeners, obviously there are people here who may not have heard you on other podcasts. There are some who will have heard you, of course. For those who haven't, maybe just briefly we can, if you don't mind sharing what Sharesy is.
So Sharesy is a venue hire platform, but for community spaces. So we make it really easy for local people and businesses to find great community spaces. They may be school halls and church halls. They could be a scout hut or a community centre, a sports hall, a football pitch, something that's in their local area where they can now book it really easily through our online platform. It's an incredibly simple experience to discover a venue, to then be able to find available time and to book it in real time. The entire experience can take a minute, but they're also knowing that they're putting money back into their local community. And that's something that's really resonated with our community. And of course, we're a two-sided marketplace. On the other side, we are trying to help the community venues to generate a sustainable income. So we want to enable them to reduce the admin effort needed to be able to deal with their bookers, to be able to think about their marketing, to manage their calendar, make that really, really easy, but also to have that sustainable income coming in. And so a bit like Airbnb, but for community.
That's really, really cool. It's awesome. And thank you for the succinct and brief explanation. I suppose your business development background probably helped a lot with coming up with a nice, easy way to describe what the business does, which is ever so important when it comes to raising, especially. And I was looking, I was doing some research around sort of how much you've raised. I think some of the figures online are not quite right, based on what you've shared with me. But you've raised just over 2 million. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So we've raised a little over £2 million. We've just had our fourth Christmas together as a team. So we've been going around for a little while, but we've raised from angel investors, and they've just been incredibly supportive. We found that our angels have consistently come in each round and backed us, and that's just been fantastically supportive for us. So yeah, that's where we are right now.
And you've done it all with angels, which is really interesting, and I definitely want to touch more on that. Was that sort of by design that you went for angels, and it was like, sort of, are you looking for people that are, they really believe in the mission and what you're going after, and you sort of thought, I'm just going to stick to that and go there, or did it just kind of you happen to bump into the right people at the right time, and then it just happened to be through angels?
I would say probably an element of trial and error.
Okay.
So I had lots of conversations early on, But the most important thing was, rather than saying we are specifically going for angels or specifically going for VCs, institutional funds, it was more about trying to find backers who really understood what we were trying to do and were really motivated by that. So that's where it really developed for us, that we found, we've now got 43 individuals who have backed Sharesy, and very experienced investors in their own right. They understand, high growth tech. So, and they all bring slightly different skill sets to us. So they've been very supportive to be able to, share their knowledge with me and the team. And I found that to be, a very good path for us.
That makes a lot of sense. I had someone recently on the podcast as well, who, again, got a lot of angels on board, and part of the strategy is to bring a lot of angels on board and then effectively reach out to all of them and say, if there's one thing you can help me with or spend half an hour with me on, what would that be, for example? And it's such, and I really do see the merit of kind of going that way, just going with actually having more investors on board, because, excuse me, some of the advice that goes around is that you don't want to have as many people on board because it means you're going to have to manage more investors and you're going to have to, deal with more people, then it's going to take up more of your time and so on. But equally, if you've got a lot of different areas of expertise that are on board that believe in your vision, that's really valuable in its own way, right?
There's something to be said for having a simple cap table, no doubt.
Right,
so there's an element of that, but actually, it's wanting to have a balance of investors that trust you just to get on with the job, but are also available to give you time if you ask for it. And I think we've got a really good balance there. Okay. Of course, down the other end, you've also got crowdfunding. We haven't taken that path. Yeah. I think actually that could be an interesting path for us, just really for the opportunity to reach a lot of people and to tell them what we're doing. But crowdfunding, I think, is a lot of work.
It is.
So you have to, really think about it and treat it like a marketing campaign. So that's something that we are considering, actually.
Yeah, it is definitely a lot of work. I can tell you from experience that it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of work, a lot more work behind the scenes than people realize. There's a lot of talking to people and bringing them on board and so on. That is part of the crowdfunding. It's not just it's not as simple as put it out there and they will come. You still have to build the relationships with a lot of people and get them in, and there are better ways to do it than others, and there are tactics people use to try and get overfunded quickly and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it definitely does take a lot of work, but there's a whole campaign element that goes into it that's really interesting. And just like you mentioned, it is definitely to be treated like a campaign. And but the fact that you're doing something that has a social element to it, or it has a B2C element to it in some way, because the thing about the impact side of things is that even if you're purely a B2B startup, if you have that side to your business, you also get to tap into almost the B2C side when it comes to crowdfunding, because you're tapping into people's, values and what they want to offer the world and so on. So even if they're not going to benefit directly from your product, if they believe in what you do, and they're not just necessarily looking to make money out of it, but they actually just believe in what you do, they're probably going to back you as well. And so it's really beautiful. I think it's a great umbrella to kind of group a lot of benefits together under one thing. But yeah, you mentioned you might do, so
I've seen it done really well.
Yeah.
So, I have seen some fantastic fundraisers out there, and absolutely something that we would consider. But, as with everything, fundraising is a distraction.
Yep.
So what you want to be doing is you want to be running the business. And of course, that's why it's so great to be able to get to profitability. Once you're at that stage, it takes the pressure off needing to fundraise, and then it's about you raise money if you want faster growth. You just, so you found your market fit, and you are now just able to grow at your own pace. That really is our objective. So, we are on a path to profitability. We think we'll get there in the middle of next year.
Okay.
So
that's fantastic.
It's really, on this runway, which is our main objective, and that's fantastic. And the current economic climate's changed, so a lot of startups are really feeling it right now. So if you are coming to the end of your runway and you're starting to think about fundraising, the appetite for investors, either individuals or funds, has just changed. And we know that that's the case. And, for investors that are thinking about where to put their money, it's very viable just to stick it in the bank. So one option is just to stick it in the bank. One option is to continue supporting up and coming businesses. And there are definitely angels out there that are looking to back great businesses. But, it's definitely a lot harder than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and that's something that I think founders are rallying around each other and sharing that pain a little bit.
Yeah, which is great to see that, everyone's kind of opening up a little bit about some of the challenges that come with it. I feel like there was a point when it was tough to be honest about these things out there in the market. I mean, it's really nice that people are opening up a little bit more about that.
I've definitely seen that in LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is quite a nice forum for founders to be able to, share their successes, but also their failures and the things that are challenging for them. Yeah. And, people are being more honest, about how hard it is. It is tough out there. And even when you're funded and you're growing and you have the pressures of growing and everything that comes with that, being able to just speak honestly about things don't always have to be perfect.
Yeah.
So
as a matter of fact, a lot of the time they probably won't be perfect, and you just kind of get on with it anyway. It's
much better that people are being honest than putting this slightly false sheen over the top of it. And people being honest and authentic about their journey, I think is helpful actually.
Yeah, definitely for the sake of other people that are trying to do similar things as well, and maybe learn from everyone. One realization I had at one point was that even the most successful out there are struggling with a bunch of stuff that we don't know about. I mean, it looks great on the outside, but if you dive deeper into it, it's always a little bit messy and complicated. It's never straightforward.
No question.
Right?
Every business has its struggles. There is something which is quite unique for seed stage businesses that they're trying to keep the wolf from the door. It's that actually, if you're operating on a runway and you're constantly walking towards that precipice, that is a pressure. That is the nature of startup. So once you start getting to, Series A and beyond, and you're on a growth path, then you're chasing that growth. It's a different type of pressure and everybody's feeling it. So, sometimes it helps to be able to just take a step back and take a breath and say, well, actually, I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
We're doing okay. There's a great Liz Foslian sketch. She does these fantastic sketches that I quite often see posted on LinkedIn. And I posted one recently where it was lots of tiny steps and someone halfway up those steps and then looking back and seeing how far they've come. And it's, you just think, well,
oh yes, I saw that.
If you think about actually how far you've come, you've taken 1,000 tiny steps, you've gone a lot further than you think.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need to give yourself a pat on the back and say, actually, we're doing okay.
Yeah. Which, funnily enough, can also help with planning the next steps better, because you're a little bit more clear-minded and less stressed and a little bit calmer, which can help with just ideating a little bit better, right?
Absolutely. And we try and do our planning on a quarterly basis. And every time you look at it, you think so much has changed. Things change really frequently.
Well, on that change, and you mentioned earlier on, I mean, I was going to come onto this later, but since we're talking about it now, we'll mention it quickly now. Just in terms of VCs and angels, or not necessarily VCs, but just generally the investment world out there right now, and the change in just approach and what's expected and what's not expected from startups these days. You raised a bunch of money, I think it was a couple of years back, right? When you did your, was it, I want to say your first round-ish was a couple of years back?
We've now done 3 rounds effectively.
Okay.
And the culture has definitely changed, and the expectations that you used to be able to fund, receive funding for growth.
Yeah,
you're not expected to be breaking even as long as you have good growth. Yeah,
that's changed completely now, right?
It feels like it has. That actually the expectation is that you need to prove your business model faster.
Yeah.
So, investors want to see that you're able to get to break even more quickly. That means, keeping your monthly burn lower. If your monthly burn is higher, it means you need to be generating more revenue. Yeah. So, there's a balance to be had there. Of course, the more that you constrain your burn and your team size and, your capabilities there, then of course you're constraining the amount of revenue you can generate.
Yes.
So it's a really tricky balance. When we first went out for our last round, the intention was that we would actually spend and grow faster.
Okay.
And we very quickly made the decision, well, actually, the market's changing here. We're going to run a little bit more lean. And it wasn't that we were downsizing, but it was that rather than we had a very aggressive hiring plan, we just slowed that hiring plan down. And we found that actually we could go a lot further than we thought with the team that we had, and without necessarily having to make significant investments, infrastructure investments. So we've managed to do that. So we've managed to keep our monthly burn quite static, but we've continued to grow. It means everybody's working pretty hard.
Yes.
But, of course, that's where it comes down to having a really high-performing team and making sure that everyone's really driving for the results that matter.
So on that point you were making just now, where it's really important to try and get that balance right, which means people are going to work harder and, they're going to have to obviously believe in what you're doing. But also you touched a little bit on culture and team earlier. So it seemed, it's pretty obvious that, culture plays a really important role within startups because everybody does usually have to work a little bit harder than you normally would in a corporate environment as well. But, what for you guys, what role does this sort of culture and team play into just everything that you're doing and how you're able to grow and sustain good growth and not spend too much on runway? Not shorten your runway too much, but also just in terms of kind of team retention and being able to keep people on board and bring more people on and so on.
Team culture for me is just so important. Getting the right group of people that can interact really well together. It's definitely not just about having the right skill set on paper. When you go out to fundraise, investors say, well, tell me about your team. They're not interested in whether you've got the right skills on paper. They want to know if you've got an actual team that really works well together, that can work for each other, that understand the mission, that are capable of driving for the results that you need. And getting that is really hard. It's really, really hard to try and get that balance right. But if you don't get it right, that's the thing that's going to kill your business. So trying to work out actually how you can get the right group of people. And I think ultimately that comes down to having a really clear mission and a vision, really understanding what are the ways of working that you're trying to create. And, do we all kind of share the same values? Do we share the same work ethic? What I've tried to do is to create a culture at Sharesy where people don't feel micromanaged, that they understand what they have to do, but then they're given the autonomy and the agency to be able to just get on with their job and to do a good job. And if they need help, then there's a support network around them, but they have the freedom to do it. And of course, with that comes accountability. So you have to be accountable for your numbers. If you fail, we fail together. So it's okay. But we need to be able to talk about it openly. So and it happens to all of us, if you miss numbers, that's okay. So what can we do to try and address it? The worst thing is where you have the accountability for the result, but you don't have the autonomy and the agency to be able to actually work how you see fit. So that, and I think that's where it can be. That's where you can start to create a toxic work environment. So, and I've had it myself. If you feel like you're responsible for hitting numbers, but you can't call the shots, then it's very disempowering.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do, and it's really difficult. But with that, actually, I've always had an attitude that if you're in a startup, it's quite difficult to hire very experienced people. And the reason for that is, first of all, they're expensive. So if you're in a startup, you don't have a lot of money to play around with. So you need to be able to afford people that you can, you need, people at a level that you can afford, first of all.
Yep, absolutely.
But also, if you're hiring very experienced people, sometimes they want to manage as opposed to roll their sleeves up and get stuck in.
Delegate more than, getting their hands dirty.
And sometimes they might be a bit of an expert in one specific thing. But in the early days of a startup, you really want all-rounders.
Yeah.
So actually what we've done is we've focused on hiring up-and-comers, rising stars, people that are smart, really capable, and we have an idea for what we want them to do, but then that evolves. And then the idea, of course, is that you bring people in and then you can develop them, you can give them lots of career opportunities to progress. And again, that's not easy to always get right, but that's the intention at least.
Yeah.
And for that reason, we've got quite a nice balance there. So we have a few senior heads in the team, but then we've got lots of rising stars and people that are really proving themselves, and that has become the engine of the company, which is really cool to see.
And definitely, like, you know, as a sort of testament to that is, by the way, if people haven't listened to your tech story episode, I'd recommend that people go and check that out, because you go into Sharesy in quite a lot, and you sort of go into a really interesting amount of details sort of around the company and building and raising and so on. And so definitely useful for people that are looking to create businesses right now to have a listen. But one of the things you talked about on there, which we don't have to go into the details of that at all, but just very quickly, you know, you had to take time off for one reason or another, and the company still ran pretty well when you were away, which is definitely a testament to what you're saying and giving people autonomy. And I suppose if you can step away from the business and everything still runs just fine, then that means that sort of things have been put together pretty well. So
right at the beginning of lockdown 2, I took 6 weeks out.
Yep.
My son wasn't very well for a period of time. I spent 6 weeks in Great Ormond Street.
Sorry to hear.
And at that time, we had just made some senior hires. The team was able to continue growing.
Yeah.
And I think
that's incredible.
It's at moments like that where you realize that you're creating something which is able to grow and develop. And of course, what you're trying to do is to create something that can do it without you.
Yes, exactly.
So that's when you know that you're on the right path. Now the business is in a very different place. But of course, you know, I've come from a corporate world. So you know, early in my career, I worked for very big companies and I've got steadily smaller and smaller. You know, you don't even think about that when you're working in a big corporate because there's so much infrastructure around you.
Right.
But when you're in a tiny team, you know,
it's not a given.
You take one person out, and that's a big chunk of the company. So you know, working in a startup is quite an extreme environment in that way.
But being able to manage that must be quite difficult, just because it's the sort of, how do you know how much autonomy to give versus how much help to support with in a way? It's sort of like, how do you think about it? Because obviously you seem to do this quite well. So I'm curious how you think about it so that others maybe can learn from it as well.
The main thing for me is not to fear failing.
Yeah.
So I'm a real advocate for that. If you fail, it means that you're learning. It means that you're trying it. It doesn't matter if you get it wrong, so long as you learn from it, and then you can use that to develop and take the next step. So, and that's the same for everybody. If you're in a culture where you fear failing, then you're never going to test and learn. You're never going to push the boundaries. So, of course, we want everybody to be striving for results, but that doesn't mean that you can't be brave with it.
Well, you talk a lot about being bold and being brave, and that's something that you're an advocate for, right? Especially when it comes to entrepreneurship and people in kind of early stage businesses to kind of just go out there and do what they want. And one of the things I sort of had in here that I wanted to talk about was, you mentioned, you know, with the whole concept of fear of failure, you don't mind failing. You think that failing is great, and if you fail, you can sort of fail forward if you have to, but as long as you learn from it and you move on. My question is, do you still get the fear of failure, or does it just not exist for you? Just like, nope, doesn't matter, I'm just going to go and try and see what happens.
I live in a constant state of anxiety.
Okay, there we go.
And I'm very open about it. But, of course, you know, I'm always worried about trying and failing and putting myself out there in the public domain. I find that terrifying. You know, I am quite a private person, and yet I put myself out there on LinkedIn quite a lot. I find that very difficult, actually, talking so publicly. But I force myself to do it because I think it's good to be able to be open and to try and be authentic about that.
What would you say is the toughest thing about it for you? Like, what do you know, when you're about to write a post and sort of send it?
I mean, the embarrassment of putting yourself out there. And so there's a great phrase from Joe Binder, actually, who is an amazing individual. Actually, he's built a career building, through LinkedIn and helping others to build their personal brand on LinkedIn.
Yeah, wow, right.
With Wow, that's right. And he's now created a whole concept around Wow workshops, which is helping companies to think about how they as individuals and as their team will represent themselves and represent their businesses online. And one of the concepts that they talk about is FOLC, F-O-L-C, fear of looking cringe. And it is real. It's
brilliant.
like, how do you overcome that? How do you overcome that fear? And of course, if you put yourself out there, it can be horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, some people I'm sure thrive on it, but I find it painful.
Yeah.
And yet I also think it's quite important to be able to start a conversation. If you put yourself out there and you talk about things which are slightly uncomfortable, then people will respond to you and they'll engage with you a bit more. And I think what he does is really brave, because he works with people that are trying to overcome that, and he's now created an entire business around that.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Concept. And of course, he works with some people that are incredibly successful and have a lot to talk about. But then, for the rest of us who are just starting out on this journey, we maybe don't feel like what we have to say is important or interesting. And actually, there's a whole community of people out there that feel the same. Yeah. So how do we all support each other? Well, we do that by putting ourselves out there and talking. And I say this to my team as well, because, people often don't feel that it's important. Like, no one cares what I have to say. I'm not going to post on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But it's about, again, tiny steps. And every single person has a personal brand of some kind. Writing a CV is your personal brand. And, if you're thinking about a role, or you're thinking about your development and thinking about what could come next, stepping up the ladder in the company that you're in, and, where you want to try and take on more responsibility, that's all about how you present yourself and the impact that you can have. So I think it's a good practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And fear of looking cringe, that's a great way to think of it, because that is kind of spot on of what actually you feel. It's the fear of looking cringe inside. One other thing as well for me is the idea that, am I just creating more noise? Am I just putting more shit, excuse my language, but more shit out there that doesn't need to be out there? Am I just kind of repeating the same thing that other people are saying? That also comes to my mind. It's like, is this idea of, do I need to put this piece of information out in the world when the world's already so full of information? But I'm working with this, by the way, as well. Like, it's just the idea of being able to put myself out there a little bit more. But I think one of the things is just to kind of, I suppose, understand that your perspective on things is, at the end of the day, your unique perspective on things. It won't be unique on everything. There are going to be a lot of areas where it's going to be very similar to what is out there already, but there will be some bits and pieces where it's only you've lived your particular life experience, and there are things you can share from that, right?
Yeah, and I have no desire to be liked by everybody.
Well, that's exactly.
Yeah. So actually, most people will ignore what I have to say.
Yeah.
But if a handful of people find it helpful, then that's good. And actually, even if nobody else reads it, then actually just the process of putting your thoughts down on paper and being able to put yourself out there actually is quite a helpful process for you as an individual. So it can, that helps. For me, it helps with my creative process, and it helps me think about, what am I trying to do in my own role, how I'm trying to develop the culture of my own business, what is the direction that we're heading in. That can be helpful.
That's amazing. 4 years running now then with Sharesy, right? So on the culture and everything that you've been doing, kind of where would you say Sharesy is now, and how have you seen the culture and team evolve over time, and how have you actively made the sort of culture evolve over time?
Well, it's always a work in progress. Mm-hmm. Things are never perfect. But there have been some interesting developments for us recently. So, we started as a business in COVID times. So that means everybody was fully remote.
It's a very tough time to do stuff with venues.
It was a strange time to start a business but actually it worked out very well for us because we could use that time to build. And then when lockdown lifted, we had a product that we could then go and talk, and people were desperate to get together. So the timing actually worked very well for us.
Yeah, wow.
But, one of the big challenges for us was about actually how we spend time together as a team. So it was quite interesting because when we were during lockdown, the members of my team were saying, well, when are we going to have a place to go so that we can have an office? We want to be together. So we got an office, and then the next bit of feedback was, well, I don't want to be in the office all the time. I want to be able to work remotely. And so actually trying to find that balance has been an interesting one. We now have an office which is our own space, which is great. We've put our sign on the wall, and it feels like
that must feel really nice.
It feels like our home, which is really nice. And my dog comes in, and it's a nice place to be. But we've settled on 3 days in the office. So Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're all together. If you're coming in, you know that other members of the team will be there. It's a really nice vibe in the office. There's lots of laughing and joking, and you have time to concentrate, but you can also have conversations. And then Mondays and Fridays are for you to decide. So some people come in and some people work from home. That's completely your choice. But we don't clock watch. We're never expecting people to be in at certain times. If you want to go to the gym mid-morning, or you want to go and take a walk, or start early, or start late, or whatever you want to do, then it's completely your choice.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And so far it seems to be working really well.
That's what I was going to ask next. Yeah, how's that going? Do you find that people? Do you find there is some sort of kind of rhythm to when people tend to come in and leave? Or do you find that people tend to be around the same sort of time, or do people just have very mixed kind of schedules at the moment? And
I think it's quite mixed. And as long as there's, some core hours where everybody is together, and we don't even define those, we let people define them for themselves, and they're able to have the time with their colleagues that they need, then that's fine. So we've got a little gym in the office. And,
that's great.
Downstairs, and, there's nice stuff in the area. We've got opportunities to be able to hang out. So, I feel like that's a really nice balance. Equally, I know lots of businesses that are fully remote.
Yep.
And they will get together for specific team time, and that works very well for them. My personal feeling is that when you are at the stage of a startup where you are working out what it is that you do. Yes. I mean, we feel like we've now got product fit, but even still, we are solving problems on a daily basis, and having the ability just to be able to turn around and talk to someone, tap someone on the shoulder, and have a conversation is so much better than speaking over a video call. And I really feel that when you're talking on a I can't remember the percentages now, but there's something about when you are interacting with someone, and the most important aspect of that communication is in body language. Yeah. Well, you lose that over a video call. So, we need that human interaction, and human interaction is really the whole concept of Sharesy. So I feel like we should be living that too. And
that makes sense. Yeah. Wow, to bring together, because ultimately as a team you are a community, right? That's coming together to create something that they want to do. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on the whole kind of remote work thing, because obviously there are mixed thoughts right now in the UK, in Silicon Valley, in different places. People are trying different approaches, but I definitely echo your sentiment around just the ability to come up with ideas and brainstorm as a group together. In my experience, is so much better than doing it over a call. It's just what we will get done over a call. What will take quite a few calls and a long time to do over multiple calls, we can be done in a couple of hours in the office together, I find. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the main objective for having people in the office together is about building that reliance on one another, and that support network, and the camaraderie, and having those. It's like the micro interactions. Yes, it's being able to just have
a small joke or a quick drink together, or just to have a quick chat about something that's on your mind, which just isn't so easy when you're remote and you don't think about it. And of course, there are benefits to working remotely. You can go and, do other things for yourself when you're around your home, but it doesn't have to be either or necessarily. So it's about trying to find that balance. And, for first jobbers or people that are young, earlier in their career,
exactly,
this is all they've ever known.
Absolutely.
When I was at that stage of my career, there was no discussion around it. Everybody was in the office, and you worked long hours, and it was very rigid. I was always pushing back against that because I felt like that was too rigid. And that's why I feel like we have a balance now where you can choose the time that you're in, but there is at least you know that when you're in together, everybody's going to be in together, and there's benefit to that too.
It's interesting you see you're pushing back on that pre-COVID. That's pretty forward thinking. We'll touch more on some of the corporate environments that you worked in the past later on, but carrying on with kind of the team and sort of what you guys are doing at the moment. What is your? I mean, I suppose you've talked about some of the challenges when it comes to kind of building businesses that have a social impact element to it as well. I guess what we're effectively coming to is that they're challenged just like any other business. You just have the same kinds of challenges. But is there any particular challenge that is unique to trying to build a business that is doing something impactful as well at the same time? Or is it just kind of similar to whatever's out there?
I mean, I would say all early stage businesses are thinking about monetizing. They're thinking about their product, and they're thinking about the most efficient way that they can actually generate net revenue. And that feels maybe a bit harder in an impact business because you are both trying to give back as best that you possibly can, but you're also trying to be commercially successful. So with us, there is this probably a healthy tension between wanting to put money back into community venues and also needing to support ourselves. So, we take a commission on bookings that come through our platform, but we don't lock venues into a long-term contract. We don't charge upfront fees. We don't charge fixed monthly fees like a SaaS business. We only get paid on a success basis. So if we've taken a booking for you, then we receive a commission. And so that's our way of wanting to create really friendly terms that supports the community venue. But of course, this is just our experience of it is, that brings challenges too. And it's about thinking about how we can, continue to focus on creating a profitable business and a P&L that works. Yeah,
exactly. Without squeezing people that need a little bit more help too much, essentially. Without introducing models that would kind of make it quite hard for them or take more money from these community venues, essentially.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And what do you guys use internally as sort of your internal measure of progress? I mean, people speak of this North Star metric, let's say. What is your top priority? What is your kind of internal measure?
Well, we are effectively a GMV business, gross merchandising value. So that means the amount that our bookers have paid to book their event. So if they've spent £100 to book a small hall, that's the amount that they pay. We then take a commission off that, which becomes our gross revenue. And so really our North Star metric is that traction. It's the number, it's the amount of GMV that we have taken on a monthly basis, and also that GMV per venue on the platform. So we're always thinking about how much we're generating for each venue, and then how much we're growing that GMV for those venues. And of course, every venue is different. So in our world, you might have a we're actually here at the Halley.
Yes.
And we're in their podcast studio.
Yep.
The Halley is on Sharesy, so you can book the Halley very easily to be able to, use the podcast studio or to book a meeting room.
Which I didn't know prior to booking, just FYI.
on an event space. So that is one example of a venue. So this is a small venue, but then we've got huge halls that can be booked with significantly higher cost per hour. And so the expectations are going to be slightly different for the income that you generate on those.
Yeah.
So
doing it per venue, it's almost like GDP per capita kind of thing, rather than just GDP. Right?
So we segment all of our different venues. All of our different customers. But in fact, something that's been quite interesting for us is that when we first started out, all of our bookings were one-off events. So they were all, a single event. It could have been a performance, or it could have been a kids' party, or a business meeting, or a filming and recording event. And now almost 60% of our revenue now comes from long-term repeat bookings. We call those super bookers. They're booking up to a year ahead. And we have everything from taekwondo classes to choir practice to kids clubs and yoga. And that repeat revenue is also great for the venues because they've got that sustainable income coming through. But actually, it's the marketplace bookings, the occasional bookings that come through as well, which is where we get this amazing word of mouth and the virality around the platform. So it's really a combination of those, and we want to be tracking all of those different elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Again, there's never really one straightforward, easy answer when it comes to startups. There's a lot of things you're trying to optimize and trying to do. I wanted to take an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that you've mentioned on other podcasts, but perhaps, or mentioned other places and posts as well, but perhaps haven't dived as deep into. And I thought it'd be really cool to kind of talk about some of those things if you're happy with that. And one of those things was that you mentioned about your mother, who was an overachiever in her own right, if I can use that word, if you're happy for me to use that word to describe her, in that she also did a lot of positive change in the world. And you talked about her a little bit briefly when we spoke, and sort of how that's kind of impacted the way that you view things and the way that you do stuff. And just really curious to kind of hear a bit more about that and the significance that your mother's sort of role has had on your journey so far.
Yeah, my mum was a professor of gastroenterology, so of bowel cancer research. And she was awarded an OBE for her work. And she unfortunately passed away in 2018, ironically from cancer. She had a short illness of a rare form of leukemia. And we talked about, in her dying days, we talked about doing good and wanting to have an impact. And that was very motivating for me and thinking about the positive impact that she's had.
Yeah.
And she had an amazing journey, so she started out as a pharmacist and then trained in epidemiology in cancer research. And she then later in her career. And then she had, a meteoric rise in her work and ended up leading really interesting research into the early detection of bowel cancer.
Wow.
Which will have saved millions and millions of lives. So, the work that she has done has just been incredibly important. It was obviously very meaningful for her. She found something where she was able to lead, meaningful change.
Yeah.
And, I, and my family are just all incredibly proud of the work that she did. An interesting career, as a woman in, interestingly in medical research, fighting in quite a male-dominated sector. And she was acknowledged for the incredible work that she was doing. And it was just really quite extraordinary. And
it must have been very inspiring for you.
It really was. And even now people come up to me and talk to me about the work that she did. And, that means a lot to me. And for my kids, who fortunately were old enough to build a really meaningful relationship with her, they were incredibly close with her. And of course, it was devastating when she died. But, I still feel fortunate that she was able to have that relationship with my kids. So, in my conversation with her, we talked about wanting to, how I should aspire to do good. And it was something that meant something to me, but I was thinking, well, how do I actually go about that? Mm-hmm. And really that conversation was where this whole thought around, trying to give back to community came from. It does pain me that she never saw anything of Sharesy. So actually, Sharesy all came along after she had died. She didn't see any of this, actually. And I really do believe that she would have been incredibly proud of it. She would have found it, she would have been excited by it. She was a real dreamer and very aspirational. And she would have been, in all the detail about what we're trying to do. But she was also very pragmatic, and the team that worked for her absolutely loved her. And still members of her old teams would write to me, and they do still, and say to me, they enjoyed working for her. It was intense, and she was a very, very hard worker. Oh. But she was inspiring, and she was a real leader, and she was thinking a lot about how to develop them and to enable them to go on to successful careers. So that is really inspiring to me. And, wherever Sharesy ends up, I'd love to think that that's coming through in my approach, because I really do care about all of the people that work in our team, and I want, the absolute best for them, and for also all of our clients on both sides of our marketplace. This is about doing good for everybody. And that sounds, a bit soppy, but really that is what we're trying to do.
That's really beautiful, though. That's really, really beautiful. Wow. I'm sure she expected all those amazing things when she was having that conversation with you. So even though she may not be able to see it now, I'm sure she knew what you'd do. So
yeah, I think it is sad that she didn't get to see it, but she's actually played a big part in it, in her own way. So it's very cool. It's
really beautiful. And hearing about leaders and who have achieved incredible things and are very hardworking and are very but still uplift everybody around them instead of stepping on people around them and kind of help to develop an incredible team. Hearing about these stories is definitely very inspiring. It's something that I personally aspire to be able to do one day. And it's incredible to hear about it, about with your mom and how she was doing that. But also with you, it really does sound like, maybe it's genetic. I don't know.
Well, I feel like I'm, much earlier in my journey and, testing and learning myself and getting stuff wrong. Yeah. Definitely not getting it all right, for sure. But I am trying to listen to feedback. Our company values are to listen first, to think big, and to love the journey. Listening first for us means, really taking the time to understand the needs of people around you and to hear the voices of people around you. And that does feel really relevant in the way that we think about each other in the team. Of course, like nothing is perfect, and we're evolving and learning and trying to grow up. But the thinking big, I think, with a startup is about that concept of being really scalable. So some businesses are just not really designed to scale. Maybe there are logistical challenges, which means that actually to have real scale will be very challenging. Well, our business really does have the potential to scale. We're still currently doing a lot of things that don't scale. So, we're a technology business, but a lot of the, some things that we do are human powered.
Yep.
But there is an aspiration that we're trying to get to the point where we can replace those human elements with technology, and that really then does make it truly scalable.
Yeah.
So that thinking kind of is in everything that we do.
That's really incredible. And being impact in some way, shape or form, has that made it into your values?
Well, that's where the do good comes from.
Yeah.
So, we always felt like it was implied in the work that we do, being an impact business, but actually now we've really stated it to make it really obvious that actually what we are doing is trying to do good. And we really stand by that. So that needs to be in the way that we act with each other, in the way that we talk to our clients. It's all about ultimately trying to think about the outcomes. And we're now, interestingly, just starting to see it. So we did a survey recently to understand how our venues will spend the income that they generate through Sharesy. And the idea was, well, these are venues that are desperately in need of funding. So what can we do that gives them money to spend? Well, interestingly, with a lot of state schools, they're operating in deficit. So the income that they generate through lettings is just bringing them closer to zero. That's powerful in of itself.
Yeah.
But recently I was walking past a church that's on Sharesy, and there was a workman on the roof, and he was fixing the flashing on the roof and the guttering. And I went over and I chatted to him, and I was like, well, this is really interesting actually, because I've heard the vicar talking about wanting to repair this roof.
Wow. And
it's like, actually, we're now doing repairs that we can afford to do.
That's incredible.
So that church has now generated over £20,000 on Sharesy, and that was a bit of a wow moment for me.
Yeah.
So if that's the impact that we can have, and they can start to do that, well, actually, that means that they're improving the infrastructure of the church, and it means that that they're creating a space that the community can enjoy. And actually, I have booked that church hall for my son's birthday party.
Perfect.
So we've actually used that. We had already been in, so this happened a few weeks after that, after my son's party.
Right.
But
but you saw it firsthand, right?
So now we're seeing. So this is where we're seeing the the full story here now. So the money that goes in is actually creating an environment, and ultimately one of our what we're trying to achieve is to enable community venues to thrive. So we want them to be able to become a place where people can come together, and that means they're reinvesting their money back into the space. That was really cool.
That's incredible. There really is something about being able to touch the change that you're making in that way. And I talked about this actually in the most recent episode, which hasn't been released yet. It will be out it's very, very soon. And we touched on the idea of being able to see the change that you're making firsthand and feel it firsthand, and just the impact that has on you as a person. So, if you're donating money to a charity and you're able to see literally this thing has happened because of you, thank you very much. It just makes such a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. So actually, that's interesting. I had donated a bag of clothes to a local charity shop. Everybody does it every now and again. You sort of have a bit of a clear out.
Yep.
And when I was dropping my stuff off, they said, "Oh, before you go, we just need to gather your information because we want to have, for gift aid and to make sure that they can claim back all the benefits and so on." No problem. And then I got an email to say, "Here is the money that we have generated from the clothes that we've sold from your donation."
Wow, that's so cool.
And actually, on the one hand, you think, well, okay, so maybe it's a bit gratifying that they've just told me the number, because it's got, it just gives you a nice warm fuzzy feeling that you feel like you've given something, so you feel like you've donated something. But actually, I think there is something meaningful in that, that's showing what it is that you have donated and how it's being used. I really do feel that is is very powerful.
It really is.
Actually.
Yeah. And it definitely makes you want to do more of it, which I think is another great thing. So yes, it does have that gratifying thing, and people may think of that as selfish. I mean, you could make the argument that yes, everything we do is primarily selfish, right? I personally, I feel like maybe sure on a really fundamental level, you know, if we go particle by particle in the brain, but I feel like there is a bit more to this than just simply say that. But even if that is the case, even if it is the case that you say everything we do is purely selfish, then, well, sure. I mean, what's wrong with feeling good so that it makes you do it again? There's nothing wrong with that, right?
I just wanted to remind myself, there's a great business called Young Planet, founded by Jason Ash. And the concept is that you can donate toys to be reused and passed on to other kids. And one of the lovely concepts within it is that you can track how that toy has been passed on and on and on.
That's
and you just think about actually who's using that and how it's being reutilized.
Yeah, wow.
Is actually such a nice idea. And, you know, we've got, my kids wore a lot of hand-me-down clothes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. I personally did. Not my kids. I don't have any kids yet, but yeah.
And we hand down clothes to our friends. And there's something really special about seeing another kid wearing the clothes that your kid was wearing. You know, it's quite an emotional feeling. It reminds you of that. It reminds you of them at that age. And that's a really nice, it's just a nice thing.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, Jason's really capturing that by thinking about how you can, you know, encourage this circular economy, enable people to pass items on, and you know,
which is something that by the way, just to quickly kind of interject here, so something that used to happen a lot, you know. So I don't know what it's like now. I feel like now it doesn't happen as often, but I feel like, you know, for me where I grew up, it was a very normal thing that the family, everyone passes things around. We have a pair of pants in the family that's been going around since the 90s. I'm not joking. It's like, it's still alive and well to this day. I don't know where the hell it was bought from, but it's an incredible pair of pants and still surviving and being passed around. And I feel like that used to happen a lot more. Maybe better than, maybe it still happens now. I'm not sure, but
it definitely does.
Yeah. Okay,
it definitely
that's great.
does.
That's really great.
You know, and people want to pass on, you know, pre-loved clothes, and now you've got, you know, the concept of, you know, people selling on clothes is also okay. So actually that's quite interesting, because it's like, you know, that's another good for profit idea when you think about Vinted and other platforms like that, you know. So you can use clothes that have been pre-worn. They're cheaper for you to buy. They're actually earning a little bit of money back, and you're saving having created something new. And I love that idea. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I'm actually a really big advocate for that. I like buying clothes secondhand.
Yeah, there is a company I want to bring on at some point soon, who are doing that, but it's rentals. So it's sort of clothes rental. So instead of buying all the clothes and filling your wardrobe with it, and then, I don't know, throwing away or doing whatever you do with it, why not rent the clothes, and then when you're done, it goes back. It gets, you know, there's an incredible process to make sure everything is fresh and new again, and then it goes out to the next person. Yeah, which I think is brilliant. Again, circular economy. You know,
this happens at all levels. So I like Nudie jeans.
Nudie jeans.
Nudie jeans have repair shops where, for the life of the product, you can take it back and they will stitch up the holes in your jeans. And what that ends up being is that you end up wearing jeans that have got real personality, because if they've got holes in and they've been stitched back together, actually that's really cool.
It is,
and it's all about just trying to reduce waste. You know, and no one's doing that better than Olio with food waste, and, you know, trying to you know, the overall impact and bringing communities together around a common cause. I just think is so powerful.
Wow. Definitely will mention all of those companies in the description. So if anybody wants to check them out, they can have a look underneath and they'll find all the information there. And hopefully we'll be speaking with a few of them soon as well. You talk a lot about being bold in the early days, and not being fear of failure, and we touched on that quite a lot earlier. And I read somewhere that you raised, as part of that being bold, I read somewhere that you raised 750K in 6 weeks. Is that accurate? Is that right?
So our very first our very first fundraise, I raised a small amount from angel investors when I had just like the early sketches of an idea.
Yeah.
But then, and this was during like the very first lockdown. And as soon as that lockdown lifted, we had created an MVP. And then after lockdown 1 lifted, we went live with no fanfare, no marketing. We started taking some bookings, and then we got locked down again.
Oh, damn.
So
yes. I forgot about that.
So went straight out, and it was around middle of November 2020. I set myself a stupid target of trying to raise £500,000 in 4 weeks. Which I was told that I was definitely going to fail.
Yeah.
And after 3 weeks, I had, of course, raised absolutely nothing. And then in the 4th week, raised £500,000.
Wow.
And it all came through a little bit stressful. And then in the first 2 weeks of January, ended up oversubscribing the round by another 250K. So yeah, that was pretty exciting. And I think the success of that was being able to tell a very simple story about what it is that we do, why we're different, why no one is approaching the problem in the way that we're approaching the problem, but also just being laser focused with the mission overall. There is a philanthropic element to the work that we do, giving back. And I think that resonated.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we had a very clear plan. The business model was simple. The commission model was simple, so investors could get it very quickly. And they jumped in. Yeah. And went from there.
Incredible. And the next question I want to ask, following up from that, was you set yourself these incredibly ambitious targets, and it sounds to me like you're pretty used to hitting them. So the question would be, have you ever missed one of those ambitious targets, and how did that feel?
I would say we have missed far more than we've hit.
Right.
So we are, I would actually say that it's been an interesting balance of setting incredibly aspirational targets and then constantly just getting close to them, but missing them, which I think, you could argue it sets a good, ambitious culture of wanting to shoot for the stars, but at the same time, that also means that you have that feeling of missing all the time.
Yeah.
Even though you're growing, you're actually missing targets. Yeah. And of course, early on, we had no idea about seasonality and about how people would interact with the platform at different times of the year. So we got it wrong a lot. We set the wrong targets. Set expectations for us and for our investors, and it was about failing and learning through. So absolutely, we've.
So you have missed. Okay,
we've missed plenty. Yeah. How
do you cope with that though? How do you make sure that people don't kind of don't feel defeated or crushed on the we keep setting these targets and missing them and it feels crap. Like, how do you kind of deal with that, both personally for you personally, but also kind of for the team around you?
So, of course, I feel it a lot. That is, I think, the nature of, being a founder and sort of living and breathing it. But everybody, I think, feels it to some degree. But the important thing is that if we succeed as a team. And if we fail as a team. And it's never on one individual. So what we've tried to do is to constantly think about how we can continue to grow. And we have, consistent linear growth, but what we're also looking for are those step changes in growth and those moments where we can do something that's slightly different that unlocks new opportunity. So missing a target is absolutely fine as long as it is sparking creativity and enabling us to keep moving forward. And that's what we found. We I would actually flip it on its head and say, when we're hitting targets, we don't stop and celebrate them enough. We just go on. We're just thinking about what's the next target.
Right.
And I'm terrible for that.
Okay.
So, if you hit a big target and get a big moment, then it's about stopping and saying, actually, guys, this was big. And, that happened to us earlier this year when we had hit the £1 million of
GMV.
Of money generated for communities.
Incredible.
And it was at the end of the month. We were like, oh, that happened 2 weeks ago. Huh. And we were like, oh, let's have a quick drink. And we had a quick drink and then we moved on. And it was like, well, actually, no, that was a big moment. That was a really seismic moment where we could say, we've come a long way. You know, the average booking for, hiring out a school hall is £240.
Oh wow!
So that's a lot of bookings.
That's a lot of bookings. Yeah. Wow. That's a big number.
And we have some smaller spaces that can be significantly less than that. So some spaces can be, £20 or £30. So that's a lot of bookings. That's a lot of traction.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations, by the way.
Well, yeah. That's amazing. This was a while ago, and actually, we had to stop and take a breath and just to think about actually what that means.
And yeah, I think celebrating successes like that, it can be difficult. I understand that it can be difficult if you're really ambitious and you want to do a lot of things, but equally important. But I'm glad you stopped and had a drink. I mean, I wasn't expecting that. When you sort of mentioned that we didn't do anything and just kind of moved on, at least you stopped and had a drink like that. At least you did that part.
Yeah, I just think it's acknowledging the thing, and then being able to move on. But for us, even though we've been around for a while, we really didn't start trading properly until February 2022. Yeah. So that was after lockdown 3 lifted. Yeah. Everything prior to that really was just testing. And so, we'd only been operating for a year and a half, and that felt like, well, this is good progress. We're onto something here.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we are coming up to the end of our time that we have booked. I really would love to chat to you for much longer. And I really wanted to dive into the corporate versus startup side of things today, but it looks like we're not going to have enough time to do that, unfortunately, today. So maybe another time we can do it.
I'd love to do that.
Felix, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was really great to have you here. And thank you for being open and honest about everything and just talking openly to everyone. Is there anything that you wanted to mention before we close the episode? Any particular shout out you want to give or anything like that?
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on the podcast. I mean, I really love the whole good for profit concept. Yeah. And, we would love to encourage more founders, entrepreneurs to go out there and to think about solving that problem, being part of that community, because it is really exciting. Yeah. Feeling like you're creating a commercial business, but also doing good at the same time is really cool. So, I love the whole idea of the podcast. For those that are interested in Sharesy, you can find us at sharesy.com. We have lots of venues. We're right now primarily focused on London. You can find all sorts of different venues around London. Very easy to book those, and you know that your money's going back into the communities. So please do spread the word. And if there are community venues in your area that you think could benefit from us, then we'd love to hear from them.
Absolutely. I'll personally spread the word as well. And definitely when I'm looking for places to book in the future, I'll be checking out Sharesy. And thank you for the kind words about the podcast. I'm very glad that you feel the same way. And thank you for coming on. We'll chat again soon.
Thanks so much.
This episode is brought to you by EcoSwap. EcoSwap is bringing together the UK's favourite eco-friendly high street brands onto a single gift card, allowing you to give the gift of choice, where your loved ones can choose from brands such as The Body Shop, Rituals, Toast Brewing, The National Trust, and many, many more. And our gift to our listeners is 10% off your first purchase with EcoSwap when you use the code GOODFORPROFIT at checkout. What sets EcoSwap apart is their commitment to sustainability and ethics. They meticulously curate their brand selection, ensuring that each one meets rigorous standards set by esteemed certifiers such as B Corp, 1% for the Planet, Climate Neutral, or they're a UK registered charity. With EcoSwap, you're not just giving a gift. You're choosing to support the UK's best brands that are genuinely committed to benefiting both people and planet. So go ahead, give an EcoSwap gift card today. Visit ecoswap.uk and use the code GOODFORPROFIT at checkout. That's good for profit with no spaces for your 10% off your first order today. That was Good for Profit with your host, Mo. Thank you very much for listening. To support us, please like, share, subscribe, and send it to whoever you think will benefit from this episode or will be interested in listening to it. We are, of course, in the early days and we're trying to grow the podcast. And so every share and every like and every comment does go a very long way for us. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any feedback, please let us know if you'd like certain topics covered, or if you have entrepreneurs or investors or ecosystem leaders that you'd like to see on the podcast, feel free to get in touch with us. The link will be in the description below this episode, where you can leave feedback and also get in touch with us to let us know if there's somebody you'd like to see on the pod. Even if you have no direct connection with them, just let us know and our team will get on it to try and get them on here. Thank you very much for listening once again, and hope to see you in the next one.